Good morning, everyone, and thank you, AIOS, for giving us this opportunity to present our instruction course. I'll be going first. Let us start off. Then I'll introduce each and every speaker as they come in. I'm Dr. Amit Pandey. I'll be presenting on Ologen versus mitomycin, safer wound modulation in trabeculectomy. I've done my long-term glaucoma fellowship and research fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya. I've been working in Surat as a consultant since last 5 years. Currently, I'm with the Center for Sight in Surat. I do not have any financial disclosures. I'll be taking this talk on these 4 subheadings: what, why, when, and how. What Ologen is basically, what is the mechanism of action, why is it a safer alternative to mitomycin C, and what about the efficacy as compared to MMC? Are there any specific indications or contraindications of Ologen, when to use it, and how to use it? What is the surgical technique like? Coming on to the first question of what Ologen is, basically it is a biodegradable porous porcine collagen implant which contains atelocollagen and lyophilized glycosaminoglycans. It has pore size between 10 to 300 microns, and it gives a controlled resistance to the aqueous outflow. In the long term, it helps in formation of a loose connective tissue matrix in the bleb area by acting as a scaffold for the growth of fibroblasts and helps in tissue remodeling. It degrades at around 3 to 6 months after implantation. So this is how it looks like up close, and this is the package that it comes in. The model that we use now is 830601. The version is 3. It comes in 2 models. One is this circular model that you see on the left-hand side. It's 6 mm in diameter and 2 mm in thickness. Whereas the square model that you see, it's a larger model where the dimensions are around 10 mm by 10 mm and the thickness remains 2 mm. This has been reported, that 10 mm size has been reported to be used in multiple cases, in 2 cases at once, by dividing it into 2 equal halves, equal triangles, and then implanting it in 2 patients on the same day. You cannot store the Ologen, so it has to be used on the same day. I haven't tried that. I've been using the 6x2 version only. Coming on to the mechanism of action, how it works. In the early post-operative period, when there's something called as dynamic scleral flap movement that happens. The scleral flap has to be sutured loosely for it to allow movement. When the intraocular pressure starts increasing, more of the aqueous starts coming in the bleb area. And this Ologen, being a porous material, it absorbs this aqueous, increases in its weight, and then presses down on the scleral flap to decrease the aqueous outflow. The reverse happens once the intraocular pressure decreases and the aqueous decreases coming into the bleb area. In the long term, what happens is the Ologen acts as a scaffold for the fibroblast to grow, as you can see here, and form a very loose connective tissue matrix with cystic spaces in between for the aqueous to drain. So at the end, you land up with a normal looking conjunctival structure with a functional bleb. Coming on to the question of why is it a safer option than mitomycin C? As we know, antimetabolites, mitomycin C and 5-fluorouracil have enhanced our trabeculectomy success rates by preventing the episcleral fibrosis and scarring of the bleb. But these are relatively toxic agents, and they are associated with corneal toxicity, wound leak, overfiltration, and hypotony in the immediate postoperative period. And in the long term, it is associated with avascular blebs, bleb leaks, blebitis, and endophthalmitis. These complications we see in our OPD, they are not very rare, they're not very uncommon, but these are not complications of trabeculectomy per se. These are complications of the use of antimetabolites. This is the kind of bleb that you get with Ologen. As you can see here, the vasculature of the conjunctiva over the bleb area is normal looking, and you do not get a thin avascular bleb as you see with mitomycin C. The UBM photograph also shows hyporeflective areas in the bleb area, which shows that the aqueous is getting drained over a period of time. That is more beautifully ASOCT photographs, where you can see these hyporeflective microcystic spaces in these 3 photographs. This is a scarred failed bleb where you do not see those microcystic spaces. What has been my experience? I've been implanting this since last 5 years. I've implanted more than 200 eyes with more than 6 months follow-up. I've got an IOP reduction of around 50% from baseline, and the change in the number of glaucoma medications have been almost 5-fold. The complications that I have encountered, I had a case of endophthalmitis recently, and I had 3 cases of transient early postoperative hypotony, but all those were successfully managed medically and did not require any surgical intervention. There has been no bleb leaks or any allergic reactions to Ologen. Coming on to the literature, phaco, there was a recent prospective randomized control trial comparing Ologen with mitomycin in phacotrabeculectomies, and they concluded by saying that it is a safe, effective alternative to MMC in combined phacotrabs. Other meta-analyses have also been published where they have comparable results between MMC and Ologen in terms of efficacy and reduction in the number of glaucoma medications, success rates, and tolerability also. Another prospective study from Bangladesh have shown that there were no adverse reactions to Ologen, and the success rate and safety profile there have been studies from India as well, long-term studies.
Amit, you can continue because it was 6 minutes. Timing is 10 minutes per talk, I think.
Right. There have been negative reports also where the efficacy was questioned in small cases. But most of these reports were before 2011, 2012, where the older model of Ologen was used, which was quite thick, around 4 mm in thickness. 7 mm by 4 mm was the dimensions then. And those Ologen implants did not yield very good results. Coming on to the indications, when to use Ologen, this is my practice pattern. I usually use it for moderate glaucomas, which are not medically controlled and require trabeculectomies. In patients with high risk of hypotony, like in old age, in high myopia, and patients who have had history of hypotony or related posterior segment complications in the other eye. Patients with thin, fragile conjunctivas where you don't want to use antifibrotics, compromised corneal endothelium, as we know mitomycin is endotheliotoxic, and in the rare cases where you would operate a pregnant lady as MMC is contraindicated, we can use Ologen. There are other indications also mentioned in the literature. Coming on to the contraindications and limitations, I usually avoid it in advanced glaucomas or in patients who require very large IOP reductions. In secondary uveitic and neovascular glaucomas also, I try to avoid Ologen. In Muslim patients, I tell them about the porcine origin of this implant, and if they are okay with it, only then I go ahead with the surgery. Cost is the biggest limiting factor because the extra 8 to 10,000 has to be borne by the patient. And that is a limiting factor in many times. Coming on to the how part, what is the surgical technique like? I'll just go through it quite quickly. The surgical steps remain the same until the closure of the scleral flap. The scleral flap suturing, I take an apical interrupted suture which is quite loose as compared to how we normally close the scleral flap in a trabeculectomy. As you can see here, the apical suture is loose and not as tight as we normally would want it to be. This will allow for that dynamic scleral flap movement in the early postoperative period. I also take a releasable side suture, which I take it as a safety precaution more than anything else. And I remove this quite early in the postoperative period at around third or fourth day. I usually take it for preventing those early flat ACs or early hypotony related complications if the patient rubs his or her eyes or sleeps on the operation side. To prevent that flat AC from happening, I take this and I remove it quite early as compared to what I would normally do in an MMC trap. Yeah, this is the Ologen implant. It goes in easily in the subconjunctival space, and we can close the conjunctiva over the Ologen implant without any issues. Doesn't require any extra skill set. If you are okay in doing a trabeculectomy, you can easily perform an Ologen implant also. A conjunctival closure, a watertight conjunctival closure is ensured. Like in, there have been other modifications also. I haven't tried any of those. These are my references. Thank you for your kind attention. So that was the end of my talk. Now I would like to invite our next speaker. Is Dr. Ashutosh online?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Ashutosh. I'll introduce him. He's Dr. Ashutosh Ganeshpuri is a glaucoma consultant and director at Netram Eye Hospital in Nagpur. He's an ex-consultant from LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad, and he has done his glaucoma long-term fellowship with clinical research fellowship and FACO fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai. Over to you, Dr. Ashutosh.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Amit, for the introduction. So I'll be talking about medications versus SLT in POAG and ocular hypertension glaucoma. So I don't have any financial disclosure. So I'll cover the topic under the following heads. So as per the AG study, visual field loss progression is increased by 30% with each 1 millimeter mercury increase in IOP fluctuation. Similar with EMGT, IOP plays a major role in reduction of progression of the glaucoma. So these are the glaucoma medications which have been introduced in market over the time, and PG analogs have their they have made their presence in share in last decade in glaucoma practice, but they have their own side effects: redness, skin exfoliation, hypertrichiasis, effect on the conjunctiva, so which leads to poor adherence. So in ideal glaucoma practice, a doctor expects patients to have 100% persistency or adherence, which is the orange line. But what data suggests is after 3 months of initial therapy, patients start losing their persistency and there are issues with compliance and adherence. So this is the history of the laser therapy introduction into the ophthalmic practice over the time. And SLT was launched by in last decade, 2 decades ago by Dr. Mark Latina, and it is a Q-switch frequency double NDR laser. If we, time permits, I'll show you a video how it works. So it's single pulse, 3 nanosecond pulse duration for fixed 400 micron spot size laser. So how it acts, this is the system basic physiology, how it functions. It has 3 parts: intracellular target, which is the melanin granule, and no competing chromophores like of hemoglobin or any other leukocytes and all. So short pulse duration is the major key factor, and thermal relaxation time has to be approximately 1 microsecond. So if the energy is more than the desired duration, it will dissipate into the cellular tissues. So what various studies have shown is that IOP reduction is roughly around 20 to 25% in patients with SLT. We can consider SLT as a primary therapy in open-angle glaucomas, OSTs, with patients also on maximum therapy prior to MIGS and all, and pseudoexfoliation glaucomas, pigmentary glaucomas, glaucoma in pseudophakia, spheroid glaucomas. This is a lens which has to be used to focus. It has one-time magnification to focus on trabecular meshwork, and it's easy to perform. Only the prerequisite is you have to be precise and expertise in gonioscopy. It's an in-office procedure. Hardly takes 10 to 15 minutes of consultant's time, and there is no scarring of the trabecular meshwork or outflow. I'll start with few of the studies which have favored SLT. This is a light trial which was done over duration of 5 years and over 6 centers. The 717 patients were allotted to the study, and they had seen a good IOP reduction of 70. Three-quarter of patients showed good drop-free IOP reduction of target IOP for 1, 2, and 3 years, and 60% patients needed one additional glaucoma medication, and 2 months at 2 months IOP reduction was seen in almost overall all the patients. They also had in the one more study was done by the light group, and they concluded saying that if patient had failed in initial 18 months, a repeat SLT had better effect than the primary SLT. So the reduction was 1 millimeter more than the primary SLT setting. So they also observed visual field progression, which was reduced in SLT patients and better controlled. One study by Robin et al. Prospective studies, they also showed comparing them to PG analogs. The eyes treated with prostaglandin showed better IOP reduction. SLT was done prior to the SLT was done in the PG analog patients. This primary therapy of SLT versus medication also favors SLT, but when the and repeat SLT, the PG analog group favored the IOP betterment. So this study by Bryan et al., they had 3 arms. So first one was with SLT, second one was medical treatment glaucoma, and third one which with failed treatment. So comparison was better in the PG analog treatment group. When SLT was used as initial therapy for open glaucoma, study by McGrath et al., it favored SLT group versus latanoprost group. Over the overall the SLT provided a mean IOP reduction of 31% in compared to the latanoprost group. So one more study, long-term study by Prasad et al., they compared 180-degree SLT versus 360-degree SLT, and 360-degree showed SLT showed statistically reduced fluctuation and better IOP control of more 2 millimeter more standard deviation. When SLT was performed on patients already on aqueous suppressants and PG analogs, SLT worked better with aqueous suppressants. One more study which was published by Katz et al., they compared PG analogs with the primary SLT, and comparison both were similar. Both groups showed similar IOP reduction. Another study which compared SLT with medication, they also observed that SLT is equivalent in IOP reduction, also a safe and effective therapy for open angle glaucoma as primary treatment. Another study by Sua et al., they compared patients who were on maximum medical therapy, and when they were treated with SLT, they showed overall success rate of 45% as per their target IOP. Marcelo et al. Also had a study, retrospective study, and the success rate in pigmentary glaucomas for 180 degrees. The SLT power use required was little lesser due to the pigmentary TM, and overall success rate as per the KM survival rate was better till 36 months. In pigmentary glaucomas, usually we have to keep power less and spots should be reduced lesser in number in compared to normal POAGs and OSTs. One more study by Lee et al. They compared SLT in NTG, and they observed that IOP fluctuations were lesser in patients who were treated with SLT in compared to the medical arm. This another study for SLT in NTG. They used triggerfish contact lens. So overall fluctuations were very less, significantly less in the SLT arm. So Alvarado et al. Have observed that the SLT works similarly like an PG analog. So they have done this similar effects on. They have seen the permeability of Schlem's canal, and this is the concept which they have modulated. So I would ask a question: is SLT repeatable? This few studies also support that SLT, when repeated, results in better outcome than the primary setup. As per this Julia et al. In second SLT, it was better controlled for 1054 days. So I usually offer patients with open angle glaucomas and OSTs SLT as a primary treatment. I explain them that would you like to go for a laser treatment which won't cost you for monthly basis and also has less complication rate, is repeatable, and with less side effects of medication. So also has a IOP fluctuation. My take-home message for SLT would be: you can simplify the glaucoma management. You can treat early, if available SLT machine. If not available in periphery, obviously glaucoma medications are available over the counter in every region. But if SLT machine is available, it is a better option, and can be offered in all newly diagnosed open angle glaucoma or OST patients as a primary treatment, and also be considered for patients who cannot tolerate medications. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashutosh. That was a wonderful talk. And now for our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Dr. Manish Pandey, sir. He is Director of Glaucoma Services at Ratan Jyoti Nethralaya, Gwalior. And he is a former consultant at Glaucoma Services in Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amit, for the introduction. And thank you, AAs, for the wonderful opportunity and a wonderful designed course for this one. So my topic is a little more difficult given by Amit, and it is related to perimetry versus disc imaging. And it's a difficult topic. What it's an indicator for starting or changing treatment in glaucoma. There are no financial disclosures. Whenever we do any sort of test, it is only in a suspicion of a disease. And if we have no suspicion of a disease, ideally, we should be doing no testing, whether it's a visual fields or whether it is any sort of imaging. For any imaging that I'll be doing in this presentation, it's mainly related to the OCT, which is the most commonly used imaging modality as of now. Combined with all these factors that we have to take into consideration before we actually decide whether we need to treat the patient or don't treat the patient. Every patient does not require therapy. Why it is important is because there is a cost of therapy which needs to be balanced with the quality of life. We just cannot give therapy to every single suspect patient, but there is also a patient's fear of going blind, and a physician also desires that there should be no harm to them. So there has to be a balance to what we are trying to achieve from our therapy. Now, glaucoma is basically an issue about diagnosis about glaucoma and progression about glaucoma, and we have to rely on visual field defects and imaging defects and whether they are stable or whether they are increasing. However, the initial evaluation of any patient may not lead to a confirmed diagnosis or a decision to treat the patient. So follow-up of suspects and patients at appropriate intervals for the detection of progression based on optic disc examination, imaging, and serial visual fields is crucial to find out whether we actually need to treat the patient or not. Take this example. A 26-year-old male with a history of trauma in the right eye around 10 years back has an angle recession in the right eye. And if you look closely, there are some slit nerve fiber layer defects in the right eye superiorly. And we see some corresponding defects in the visual fields and the OCT in the right eye. The left eye appears to be fairly normal. But even then, we do not require a treatment because intraocular pressures are under control, and it does not require a treatment. We just monitored for 6 monthly whether there is an increase in glaucoma in the right eye or not. Take another example of this visual fields. The patient is on medication, and we see two visual fields over a couple of years, and we see that it looks fairly stable to us if you look on the close terms. But if you miss that disc hemorrhage in that eye, we'll possibly miss a further progression which is likely to happen. So clinical evaluation of optic disc in consideration to what we see in the visual fields or the imaging is also mandatory to find out whether the patient is likely to progress or not. But there may be agreements and disagreements between the two testings, whether we're talking about visual fields and OCT for this purpose. And we should not base our diagnosis and therapy on the results of a single test. And we have to take all these pictures before we actually have a step ladder approach to find a treatment. Otherwise, we land up something called as a red disease and the green disease, which I'll come up subsequently. Take this patient who's a 61-year-old female, and you can see some slit nerve fiber layer defects and superior thinning in the left eye. And we see a corresponding defects in the OCT as well as the GCC, and we see some inferior defects. So it's fine. The things correlate to what we see clinically on the optic disc. The right eye appears to be normal to me, and all the imaging comes out to be normal. Take this example, and we can see the slit nerve fiber layer defect in the red-free picture in the left eye. And the OCT only shows borderline defects. We may actually miss out. If we miss a clinical evaluation of optic disc, we may actually overpass this OCT testing, which is just showing a borderline changes there. Take this 24-year-old male who's a steroid responder with open angles, and the right eye appears to be normal to us. In the left eye, there is a presence of a nerve fiber layer defect inferiorly, which is marked with a red arrow. We can easily overlook this visual fields as being fairly normal, except for that single spot there. And if you do the OCT for this patient, it comes out to be absolutely normal to us. So this is actually a green disease. So if we miss that clinical picture, the OCT is not going to help us further in diagnosis or even in progression for this patient. Take this picture. So this patient has come with a large cupping, and basically the optic discs are large in size. Do the visual fields, they come out to be normal. And if somebody does an OCT, that comes out to be abnormal. So how do we rely on that? It's more of a clinical acumen that needs to be attained rather than based on imaging or the visual fields that needs. This is an example of a red disease. A red disease would basically mean that imaging is showing up some defects which are actually not existent in that patient. So there may be a lot of factors which may be responsible for this. A very important thing about OCT is something called as a floor effect. So OCTs may actually help you at till a certain point, but after a certain point, they will not help you because there is a floor effect. Take this 44-year-old patient who has a strong family history of glaucoma, open angles, and we can see an advanced disc damage in both the eyes. He's been undergoing serial visual OCTs elsewhere, and multiple OCTs are available with him. But if you look at it closely, you'll only find those red spots there. If you look at it closely, you'd find that the average RNFL thickness is close to around 50 microns, which is the lowest level to which an OCT can actually measure. And if you look at the graph also on the lower side with the red arrow, we will show that it's absolutely flat. So this is called as a floor effect because OCT cannot decipher beyond that 45 or 50 microns. And this is the lowest level which the OCT can measure. Needless to say, the visual fields on a 10-2 show advanced damage. So there is no need to get an OCT done to either diagnose or show a progression in this sort of a patient. So there is something called as a structure function correlation. And if we talk about OCT and visual fields, a non-linear relationship exists between structure and function as glaucoma progresses. This is not a linear relation. So if we look at this graph and we look from the right side to the left side, so the estimated RGC count is more on the right side as compared to the left side. And we see the mean deviation in the top arrow and the RNFL below. And we see that the mean deviation does not change so much as the RNFL in the initial stages of the disease when the RGC count is better. If we go into advanced stages on the left side, we see the change in the mean deviation is much more as compared to what changes we see in the RNFL. So initially it is more of the RNFL, and later on it's more on the changes on the mean deviation which we may see. Therefore, structural changes are much more easily detectable in early disease, whereas functional assessments are more likely to show a change in eyes with advanced disease. So how do we go along from this sort of an information? It's important to stage our glaucoma to find out what sort of glaucoma the patient has, whether it's a suspect, it's an early glaucoma, it's a moderate glaucoma, or it's a severe glaucoma. In the suspect to an early glaucomas, we may be doing visual fields and imaging, whatever is available, whether it's an OCT or something else. But when you have perimetric defects from early, moderate to a severe stage, you should always be doing an OCT to find out risk for progression, despite whatever imaging you might be doing. And whatever change we see, we have to find out whether the change is real or the change is artifactual, whether the change is actually there in the patient or not. Because there is something called as a retest variability, which is there in visual fields. And the number of times you repeat that test, there may be a certain amount of variability, especially in patients with advanced glaucomas. Take this example of a patient in which serial visual fields have been done. And at number 3, you can see number 1 and 2 look very similar. And number 3, there is an apparent progression in that eye. But unless and until you are very sure that this is related to the patient and everything appears to be normal, the pressures are normal, the optic discs appear to be stable, repeat that visual field to find out whether there is an actual progression or not. And in number 4, you find that there is actually no progression. This is just a variability of the visual fields that we are looking at. OCT is also plagued by these sort of artifacts which may be related to imaging, the image quality and the segmentation errors. Also, the patient-related artifacts, patient might have moved during the OCT and the image may not be correct, or there may be certain amount of tilt of the optic disc, or there may be certain myopia which may affect it. So how do we, if we compare the glaucoma progression detection by means of OCT and visual fields, how do we stand? On the left side picture, we are talking about patients with glaucoma suspects and pre-perimetric patients, and we find that OCT has a higher detection rate as compared to visual fields for glaucoma progression. That's understood. If you look on the right side, that's perimetric glaucoma. That means patients who have glaucoma and they have visual field defects. We find that OCT still shows a better detection for progression as compared to visual fields. However, if we look closely into this graph again, and we go from mild to moderate to advanced glaucomas, we find that the detection by the RNFL in OCTs gradually decreases when we are moving from mild to advanced glaucomas. You can see it's around 43 in mild and as goes to 26.7 in advanced glaucomas. Compare it to a visual fields and you find that visual fields will still be in detection in advanced glaucomas. Just the last concluding slides. So in eyes without established visual field loss, when there is no visual field loss, structural information is useful for diagnosis and progression. When there is early to moderate visual field loss, that means there is a visual field loss which is early to moderate, both structural and functional information can be used. But as soon as we reach an advanced glaucomas, OCT may reach the floor and it's of no use to do it. And visual field testing becomes the only modality of disease progression. So finally, for patients with perimetric defects, visual fields remain the mainstay of diagnosis and progression and need to step up the therapy. Imaging does play a major part in documenting and detection of change, especially in early glaucomas. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful talk and it's always good to hear you. Our next speaker is Dr. Mayav, who is currently a consultant at Glaucoma and Cataract Services, Nucleus Eye and Skin Clinic, and Lotus Eye Hospital in Mumbai. He's a postgraduate and he has done his glaucoma fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai. He's also completed his FRCS Glasgow in 2018. And his areas of interest are secondary glaucomas and angle closure disease. Dr. Mayav, over to you.
Thanks, Amit. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Slides are visible?
Yes, not the slideshow.
Yeah,
just
okay. So thank you, Dr. Amit and AIOS, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this instruction course, which is on debates of glaucoma and trying to understand the correct way forward. So my topic is mitomycin C versus 5-fluorouracil for bleb needling. I do not have any financial interest in any of the products in this presentation. So what is bleb needling? Bleb needling is nothing but a surgical intervention which is aimed at revising bleb architecture by lysing subconjunctival fibrotic tissue that interferes with successful filtration and hence causes bleb failure or glaucoma surgery failure. Bleb revision surgery has been advocated as early as 1941, but it was popularized further in the 1960s. But needling has become more popular after the advent of anti-fibrotic agents or anti-metabolites. So bleb anatomy basically, a bleb has loculations within it, which can be either diffuse or localized. Margins of these loculations within a bleb are formed by bands between either the conjunctiva and the episclera, or the conjunctiva and the sclera, or subsclerally itself, which separates the main area of filtration from the surrounding areas of the bleb. And lysis or puncturing of these bands of fibrous tissue to increase the area of filtration and improve the functioning of the bleb constitutes needling. Just basic visual inspection of a bleb may not give us much idea regarding functioning. And apparently, flap bleb may be functioning well, and a centered and a bleb with good height because of loculations may not function well. So, careful slit lamp examination, gonioscopy in all cases, very important along with the IOP measurements to know which bleb is functioning or not. And ASOCT also helps in finding out cystic spaces. So basically, this is a photograph. If you peel a bleb and you see the inner surface, these are the loculations which you are seeing. And this is a photograph of a bleb showing us the ring of steel phenomenon, which happens because of fibrosis of the edge of the bleb, which does not allow aqueous to flow further beyond and limits its filtration. So what are the indications of bleb needling? Basically, bleb encapsulation. If there's inadequate control despite an elevated bleb, if there's a flat bleb with a scleral flap which is visible, any bleb which requires topical AGMs to control IOP, this aesthetic blebs. Important to note is gonioscopy is absolute must for any patient before we decide to that patient needs to undergo bleeding, because a patent internal stoma is important for us to give the best possible outcome. So these are just a couple of videos which I talk about, which are thanks to Dr. Manish. Here you can see these are slit lamp based videos that after anesthesia and betadine cleaning with a 26 gauge needle using side to side movements of the needle, you are trying to break the loculations which are there within the bleb area, and therefore you try to increase the bleb filtering area. In the second video which you see here, you can see there is a gradual increase in the bleb height because there is egress of aqueous from the anterior chamber into the subconjunctival space, showing that there is lysis of the conjunctival bands. Apologies for not having an operation theater based video system. So use of antifibrotic agents, most commonly used are 5-fluorouracil, which is nothing but a halogenated pyrimidine analog. It is a competitive inhibitor of thiomimetic synthase. It gets incorporated into DNA and RNA of actively dividing cells, causing defective protein synthesis and interferes with the cell growth cycle. Important point to note is that cells only in the synthesis phase are affected, but allow other cells to proliferate once the 5-FU exposure is over. In comparison, mitomycin C, it is an antibiotic derived from Streptomyces cespitosus, which is an alkylating agent, cross-links DNA, inhibits synthesis of protein, inhibits mitosis, and acts on all stages of cell replication cycle, inhibiting both dividing and resting cells. So theoretically, it is a more potent antimetabolite as compared to 5-FU, and it possesses potent anti-angiogenic properties as well. So in the context of bleb needling, which should be our antifibrotic of choice? MMC or 5-FU. We'll look at these in certain headings like dosage, technique, what is the IOP control, what are the success rates, use of anti-glaucoma medications post-needling, complications, and risk factors. Now to assimilate all these, we have to look at obviously literature. There are numerous articles available which have comparative and non-comparative studies, retrospective and prospective studies, which have given varying results. So actually the data doesn't point us into one particular direction, and it's difficult to compile considering there are so many studies which are not standardized, as the techniques are different, dosages are different. But a particular meta-analysis which came out in 2020, which compiled all these studies, whether comparative or non-comparative, has helped me in reaching to some endpoint. So basically, dosage of 5-FU is basically 5 milligram in 0.1 ml, which has been used by all studies. Usually injected at the end of needling procedure, either in the inferior conjunctiva or 90 degrees away from the bleb, and usually with a 25, 26 or 27 needle, usually after the procedure. While topical mitomycin C has been used in various dosages, 0.02 milligram, 0.04 milligram, and also in some studies 0.4 milligram per ml, which is quite a higher dose and causes a slightly higher number of complications as not advised. Timing of injection again has varied. Many studies have injected 5 to 10 minutes before needling. Few studies have injected during needling as well, and usually injected away from the bleb area. Needling procedures ideally should be done in the operation theater itself because it gives you better control of the procedure, gives you better handling. And in case there is some sort of complication like hemorrhage into the anterior chamber, sudden AC shallowing will give you more control compared to slit lamp for needling. But few studies which I've mentioned have also done slit lamp needling. So it's ultimately a surgeon's choice. IOP control of MMC versus 5FU showed a modest drop in both, which is almost equivalent. Higher baseline IOP resulted in higher IOP reduction in both groups. If you see, however, the topical mitomycin C, which is shown in blue, numerically has shown a slightly higher IOP reduction compared to 5FU. Success rates. Most studies evaluated success rates as complete success. That's a 20% drop in IOP or IOP less than 21 millimeter of mercury without medications, or qualified success, which is the above with medications at the last visit, which could either be 1, 2, or 3 years. Again, the success rates for both are almost similar, with mitomycin C showing slightly better complete success rate compared to fluorouracil. However, there are studies which have showed equivalent success rates for both as well. IOP medications post needling, however, have shown a statistically significant reduction up to 1 year of follow-up in both mitomycin C and 5FU. Is there any impact of pre-needling bleb morphology? Again, varying results between different studies. However, some have shown that if there's a bleb with greater central bleb inspection and higher bleb, it will associate with slightly higher chance of success. And a moderately injected or vascularized bleb had a higher chance of success compared to a whitish ischemic looking bleb. Complications. Again, this is very important for us. Mitomycin C, because of its complications like ciliary body damage, coronary decompensation, is a little more fearful as far as complications is concerned. However, as far as the studies post needling, they have not shown us much difference between 5FU and mitomycin C, with conjunctival hemorrhage remaining seen in almost 10% of cases with mitomycin C, and slight increase in hypotony and serious choroidal detachment. But however, these are not statistically significant, only numerically different. And studies with longer duration and larger sample size have had more complications. And what are the possible risk factors for surgical outcome? So timing of needling, early needling, which is I think quite commonly known to all of us, will have better outcomes, and this was seen in both groups. So any needling which is done 2 months to 6 months post primary trabeculectomy will have better outcome. Eyes which have had an increase in number of needlings, 2, 3, 4 needlings, have shown worse outcomes at final follow-up. And eyes which have had immediate drop, IOP drop post needling, if you discount any sort of bleb leak or choroidal effusion, have shown better outcomes in the long term. So as I said, again, looking at all these factors, as I said, what was a take-home or take-clinic message? Data is not very robust. Data does not give us a very clear idea in giving us an obvious answer whether mitomycin C or 5FU for bleb needling is better. However, either one of them should be used for all our needlings, preferably in the operation theater. Needling, as we know, is moderately effective in prolonging the life of a bleb. Mitomycin C and 5FU are both potent agents which improve success. MMC theoretically has slightly better success rates, but slightly more complications, so should be done carefully. Ideally should be injected, I think, 5 to 10 minutes earlier compared to needling, so that there's enough time for absorption, so that when you start needling, there is no chance for the mitomycin C to go directly into the anterior chamber at that point of time and cause issue with either corneal endothelial damage or with ciliary body toxicity, which can be extremely dangerous and can cause large visual morbidity in such patients, and we should be careful of that. And early needling, 2 to 6 months, gives us better outcomes, and fewer needlings or fewer procedures will give us better outcomes. These are my references. And thank you, Amit, and thank you, AIOS, again, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayav. It was very informative, very practical, and definitely help many glaucoma patients. Our next speaker would be Dr. Prashant Srivastava. He is a glaucoma consultant at Netralayam and BBI Foundation. He has done his long-term glaucoma fellowship, and he has also worked as a consultant in the Department of Glaucoma in Shankar Nethralaya. And he has multiple publications in peer-reviewed journals and has been an instructor and speaker at various ophthalmic forums. Dr. Prashant, kindly start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amit. First of all, I would like to thank AIOS for and Dr. Amit for including me in this instruction course. Is my slide visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I'll be talking about clear lens extraction and peripheral iridotomy in angle closure disease. First of all, I have no financial interest in any of the equipment, procedure, or investigation shown in my presentation. To understand the management of angle closure, we have to first understand the pathogenesis of angle closure. The first event is usually a pupillary block, which leads to anterior bowing of the iris, and then crowding of the iris, which leads to a positional angle closure. And further, if we don't interrupt the process, it will lead to a synovial angle closure, and then episode of angle closure glaucoma. So to prevent this all to be happening, we can do a laser YAG peripheral iridotomy, which is a very safe and effective tool procedure to prevent abolish the pupillary block. So just we can create a peripheral iridotomy which can establish alternate pathway for the aqueous outflow. So that is established treatment for primary angle closure glaucoma, primary angle glaucoma suspects in special cases, and also in the contralateral eyes of acute primary angle closure glaucoma. It's a safe and quick procedure, and it takes around 2-3 minutes after preparing the patient, and it's an outdated procedure, so it's very easy to perform. Although there's very less complications are seen very less, but there are transient rise of intraocular pressure. So in certain hyphema can be seen in certain condition. Sometimes patients may complain of dysphotopsia especially if the PI is done in the palpebral zone, and rarely it can produce aqueous misdirection syndrome and progression of cataract. Now again, understanding the risk factors of primary angle closure. What are the risk factors actually causing the angle closure? In most of the cases, the lens bulk, which is increasing in size with the age of the patient, is occupying large area in the large volume inside the eye. So that is is a major cause in most of the cases. A shallow anterior chamber with area and volume, a thicker iris, and anterior contour of the iris, or convexity of the iris, or curvature of the iris, and a high lens vault. Now, what is lens vault? Lens vault is the perpendicular distance of the anterior lens surface from to a line drawn artificially from the point connecting two scleral spur. So this is the distance called as lens vault. So with the aging of the patient and with the progression of cataract, this lens vault increases over the period of time, which causes the crowding of the angle. So remove the lens can depend the volume of the anterior chamber or depth. So as we can see in the OCT picture, if you remove the lens and put a 1 millimeter thick, a 4 millimeter thick lens, which is cataractus, getting replaced with a 1 millimeter thick acrylic lens, so large amount of volume is formed. So it also, apart from that, it also revolves the pupillary block, and also it inverts parietal iris mechanism. Also, additionally, in the bag implantation, the IOL causes traction of the trabecular meshwork, and that can open up the trabecular meshwork also. Apart from this, there are other mechanisms which also helps in angle closure glaucoma. Because of continuous flush of the fluid and this hydrostatic pressure, it can mechanically strip open the few of the synovium which is recently formed. It can flush the trabecular meshwork, so it can also help in removing the blockage. Because of the increased amount of prostaglandins, the interleukins, necrosis factor, it can enhance the alternative pathway or UV scleral flow of the aqueous. So based on these studies, there are wide acceptance of lens-based surgery for the management of angle closure disease. However, a clear lens extraction still remains controversial in the absence of concrete evidence. So it doesn't give a license to do a clear lens extraction. Now, there are various studies who have compared the clear lens extraction versus conventional therapy. Now, this is a study by Tham and colleague, which they have compared the result of clear lens extraction versus trabeculectomy, and in 26 eyes they performed phacoemulsification, and 24 eyes they performed a trab. And over a period of 24 months, they found that the IOP reduction was similar in both the groups. However, a trabeculectomy groups encountered more amount of complications. They also needed fewer drugs, but the complication was slightly more. So they emphasized that the trabeculectomy can be bypassed, and we can directly go ahead and do a cataract extraction in such patients. This is a study, Indian study by Tanuj Zada et al. They have performed this normal conventional iridotomy, and once the IOP was not controlled, after 8 weeks, they performed the clear lens extraction when the IOP was more than 25 millimeter of mercury after doing a YAG PI. And they found that the IOP dropped from a mean of 27 millimeter of mercury to 13 millimeter of mercury, and also other parameters like angle opening distance becomes hugely increased from 102 to 0.31. So almost 3 times it is getting increased. So there is wide opening angle after the clear lens extraction. Major controversy arose after this publication by Lancet, which is effectiveness of early lens extraction for the treatment of primary angle closure, or EAGLE trial. So they advocated the role of clear lens extraction over the conventional therapy for the treatment of primary angle closure. They included 50 patients. They included 50 patients who are more than 50 years of age. It's a multi-centric randomized controlled trial done in five countries and more than 30 centers. They enrolled 419 patients, and out of which 155 has primary angle closure and 263 has primary angle glaucoma. So 208 patients were subjected to clear lens extraction, and 211 patients were subjected to standard care of doing a peripheral iridotomy and medically managing the case. And if the surgery is required, then further doing the surgery. What they have found that the mean IOP of 1 millimeter lower in the clear lens extraction group at the age of 3 millimeter as compared to the conventional therapy. Less patients in clear lens extraction group received any further treatment. Visual acuity was better in ETDRS chart, and they also had better contrast sensitivity and correction of refractive error. If you talk about visual field deterioration, there was no significant difference in the clear lens extraction group and the conventional therapy group. But this study has several limitations. First limitation is the sampling bias. So out of 805 patients enrolled for the study, the study was done only in 419 patients. So preferably the patients were selected seeing their IOP levels and other things. The authors have also clubbed primary angle closure and primary angle closure glaucoma together, which is not because both of the diseases have different prognosis and different outcomes, so they cannot be clubbed together. Major drawback of this study is the gonioscopy data. They did not document proper gonioscopy in most of the patients, and also lens related changes like vault of the lens and intumescence of the cataract was not mentioned in the study, which is a very big limitation to the study. One of the positive findings that showed that the improvement in the quality of life was assessed by questionnaire like European Quality of Life 5-dimension index. Now this questionnaire is the subject of perception. Same question will be asked to me and some other person. They may feel different to a different situation. So it's a matter of perception. So there is a potential bias in the questionnaire and the results. And they also they have shown that it is very cost-effective way of managing the glaucoma. But again, the cost effectiveness is a matter of geographical location of the patient, cost of surgery in that location, whether the patient is insured by medical insurance or not, and also the role of government in supplying medicines and other procedures. So it's a multifactorial thing which cannot be generalized in different countries. Regression of the mean. Now, this is again a limitation of this study. Now, Chen and al. Have noted that a high IOP is the single most significant factor associated with a great IOP drop after phacoemulsification. What it says, so regression of mean is a statistical phenomenon. If you have a significantly high pre-op pressure, and after doing a procedure, the IOP drops, that signifies or that extrapolates that the procedure itself is a reason behind a significant drop in the pressure. So because of the high pre-op pressure and regression to the mean, the significantly lowered IOP mentioned in many of the reports, both EAGLE study and the study by Dada, they have the pre-op IOP more than 30 and more than 25. That is why the drop in IOP was very much significant. Just 2 minutes. Also, doing an phacoemulsification or cataract extraction in angle closure disease have multiple risk factors. They have shallow anterior chamber, they have a small papillary aperture, small pupil flaccid iris. So there is huge risk in doing surgery in such patients. In this study, they have also documented the cases of posterior capsule rupture, vitreous loss, corneal edema. So visual acuity was deteriorated. So just imagine a situation, a patient coming with a vision of 6x6 with a high IOP, and we are doing a phacoemulsification. Remember, the study was done at the best center with best of the equipments and best of the surgeons. If an average surgeon does that, he might end up in complication, and the visual acuity may drop from 6x6 to less than that. So that can compromise the quality of life and also implicate a serious medical legal issues to the doctor also. So the actual flowchart should be, if in case of mild glaucoma with cataract, we should go ahead and do a cataract surgery. If patient has severe glaucoma with cataract, done. This last And if the patient doesn't have cataract, we should do a trabeculectomy only. Phacotrabeculectomy should be done in special cases only, where the anterior chamber depth is less than 2 mm, length thickness to axial length, the ratio should be is less than 0.2 mm, or there is a microphakia and sagittal diameter is less than 6.4 mm. And also the special condition where we can consider early lens extraction, but not a clear lens extraction. So my summary is the conventional treatment of doing a PI and medical management is more scientific and safe. Early lens extraction will be tried in primary angular glaucoma with unfavorable outcome. Prudent counseling is a must, and laser iridotomy should be performed in all cases. We cannot bypass this step, and combined should be done in cases of severe glaucoma. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. It's really a controversial topic and very well put together, and the take-home messages were quite clear. Our next speaker is Dr. Surajit Sen. He's currently working as a consultant at glaucoma and cataract services at Shankar Nethralaya, Kolkata. He's also done his post-graduation and fellowship in glaucoma from Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai. Over to you, Dr. Surajit.
Thank you, Amit. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Some problem. The slides are not moving. Just give me 1 minute time. Okay. Can you all see my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Amit to include me in this interesting IC. And I'll discuss this topic, this trabeculectomy versus glaucoma drainage devices in neovascular glaucoma. I don't have any financial interest. This is the overview of my presentation. First, I will briefly discuss on neovascular glaucoma, then the literature review on surgical management of neovascular glaucoma. As you all know, neovascular glaucoma is the most notorious form of secondary glaucoma, and it is one of the most difficult glaucoma to manage. And it is characterized by the presence of no vessels at the iris and the angle, and the most common cause is the posterior segment ischemia. It used to be known as hemorrhagic glaucoma, congestive glaucoma, thrombotic glaucoma, and rheumatic glaucoma also, before Dr. Weiss et al. Termed it as neovascular glaucoma in 1963. Coming to the etiopathogenesis part, the common etiologies are like CRVO, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, carotid artery occlusion, ocular ischemic syndrome, retinopathy of prematurity, and some lesser but quite common also. It is Ills disease, Coats disease, ocular neoplasm, chronic uveitis, VKH, and trauma. Coming to the pathogenesis part, it is because of the diminished perfusion of the retina which causes the retinal ischemia and releases the angiogenic factors, which diffuse forward in the anterior chamber, reverses iritis at the pupillary margin is seen, and which forms a fibrous membrane which contains myofibroblast, which pulls the posterior pigment layer of the iris anteriorly, causing the ectropion EV and the peripheral anterior synechial formation. So it is the angle closure here is because of anterior pulling mechanism. The main factor responsible for this, it is because of the disbalance between the pro-angiogenic and antiogenic factors. The pro-angiogenic factors are most commonly the VEGF, IL-6, and the anti-angiogenic factors like platelet pigment epithelium derived factors. The stages are pre-glaucoma stage, where the neovessels are seen in the pupillary margin at angle with essentially normal intraocular pressure, and the open angle stage, where the spreading of neovessels are seen with fibrovascular tissue covering the angle with high IOP. Angle closure disease, there is heavy neovascularization and extensive peripheral anterior synechia is seen, and in regression stage there is sealed angle, but less vessels are less visible. In this picture, you can see from this part the open angle gradually, when the disease is progressing, the peripheral iris is being pulled up and closing down the angle. Coming to the treatment part, according to stage, for the rebasis IDDs, the panretinal photocoagulation is required. It depends mostly on the pathology, why it is causing this neovascularization, and most commonly is posterior segment ischemia. So the panretinal photocoagulation is required, anti-VEGF injection, and obviously treating the cause. Maybe if there is unsettled RD or something is there, we need to treat that part also. For the open angle set, all the treatment mentioned previously, and also with that the IOP lowering agents with filtration surgery. For close angle globe, it is essentially the same. And for eyes with guided visual prognosis, cyclodestructive procedures like cyclophotocoagulation and with diode laser, and with or without anti-retinal cryopexy, by the media opacity is for the media opacity we can't do the panretinal photocoagulation. Coming to the surgical management of NVG, the usually managed with trabeculectomy with antimetabolites and glaucoma drainage devices. The trabeculectomy in neovascular NVG is considered as a high risk procedure. High risk means it is a high risk of failure. So higher concentration of antimetabolites with longer duration needs to be used. And definitely, whenever it is possible, panretinal photocoagulation should be completed, and intravitreal anti-VEGF injection prior to the surgery increase the success rate of the procedure. But even with that also, the surgeon should keep it in mind that the possibility of intraoperative and postoperative bleeding is higher in neovascular glaucoma. The surgical PI is to be avoided whenever it is possible, and may need early release of releasable sutures and multiple doses of subconjunctival 5 FU injections are required, because these blebs are more prone for early scarring. Come to the study where the Takihara et al. In this retrospective study had looked into the prognostic factors for surgical failure and trabeculectomy with mitomycin C. And they have concluded that younger age, post-vitrectomized eye, fellow eye with an NVG, and unremoved proliferative membrane and or unrepaired retinal detachment are the poor prognostic factor for surgical failure in these patients. Another retrospective study here also, it has beneficial effect of intravitreal bevacizumab. It has shown that it has definitely increases the success rate of the procedure of trabeculectomy in NVG, and also it causes the chances of it reduces the chances of postoperative hyphema. Coming to the GDDs in neovascular glaucoma, these glaucoma drainage devices are increasingly being considered as the primary surgical procedure in the management of NVG, where there is high risk of failure of conventional filtration surgery. The both valved or non-valved devices gives almost similar IOP lowering, and there is no statistically significant difference between them. A longer tube length inside the eye is preferable, as these eyes are more prone for hyphema postoperatively, which can block the tube. And also the tuburation rate is quite high in this patient, so it is always advisable to put the tube through a 1 to 2 millimeter of scleral tunnel, and then to cover the tube properly with a proper patch graft. This is a prospective non-readable studies. They have looked in the efficacy of intravitreal ranibizumab combined with Ahmed glaucoma valve implantation for the treatment of the neovascular glaucoma, and they have concluded here that the use of ranibizumab didn't help has no significant effect on medium or long-term outcome of the neovascular glaucoma patient. Here they have included the 43 neovascular glaucoma patient, and they have divided this patient 21 in patients with preoperatively ranibizumab, and around 22 patients where the ranibizumab were not given. And there was no statistically significant difference between the outcome of the procedure. Here also another study, it is a meta-analysis. Here they have looked into the clinical outcomes of AGV implantation with or without intravitreal bevacizumab treatment with neovascular glaucoma. Here they also echoed the same thing. They have told that using the bevacizumab had no significant. Both groups were comparable in the reduction of glaucoma medications also, but it had pointed out that the bevacizumab group definitely had significant lower frequency of hyphema than the control group. So tube or trap, which one is preferable in NVG? So this prospective study, the authors have looked into the intravitreal ranibizumab injection combined trabeculectomy versus AGV in treatment of NVG, and they have concluded here that intravitreal ranibizumab injection combined with trabeculectomy was an effective and safe treatment. IVR injection combined trabeculectomy had less complication and higher success ratio. And this one, another study where the trabeculectomy and AGV was compared. It is a retrospective study, but there was no statistically significant difference between both groups in postoperative visual acuity intraocular pressure. They have concluded. Another study, AGV, that neovascular glaucoma associated with vitreous hemorrhage. So retinal procedure may need to be combined with the glaucoma procedure also. In this study, there was 33 patients are in around 18 eyes underwent the PPV and 15 eyes underwent PPV with trabeculectomy. So, and postoperative IVR decrease was significant in both eyes, but it has shown that after 1 year, the IOP was significantly low in the AGV group, and there was no significant difference in postoperative complications were also in both groups. So the take-home message is there is no definite guideline which procedure is better in this neovascular glaucoma, and it needs to be individualized. So roughly we can say that in quiet eyes with regressed NVI and NVA, anti-VEGF followed by trabeculectomy with mitomycin C is a preferable option. In case of active NVI, NVA with active retinal pathology or combined VR procedure with glaucoma surgery, a tube with or without preoperative anti-VEGF may be a preferable option. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Surajit. Definitely, neovascular glaucoma is one of the most challenging cases that we get, and it was beautifully explained about the management. I would like to start question and answers. If anyone has any questions, I think we are the only ones here, so we can discuss among ourselves. And there are no, I think there are no questions on the other platforms also. So I think we can discuss among ourselves. We have enough time. So let us start. I think I'll start first. I have a question for Dr. Ashutosh. In terms of financial differences, what is the difference between your SLT and the medical management now that we have quite a few low-cost glaucoma medications also? So is that something that you consider before offering that to the patient?
Hello. Yeah, actually, SLT usually ranges from means like first sitting if we have done. Usually people charge if a solo practitioner usually charges from roughly 2,500 to 5,000. It ranges between that range. And if we consider the survival rate of 2 to 3 years, if minimum we consider, it is obviously much lesser than even the generic medications which will be used over the time. So comparable if we compare it cost effective wise, see post COVID everybody and has financial issues. So if that way also if we look, I think SLT will be better. And there is one issue with SLT, availability of the machine. So, but that is a different point of view.
Right. Anyone else would like to weigh in on SLT versus medications?
What are your non-responder rates for SLT in your experience or your practice per se? And let's say if you give an option of SLT versus medications in 10 patients, how many of them convert to SLT and how many of them still continue with medication?
See, to draw the point, actually it's a very good question. Yesterday after our talk on generic versus that, Dr. Murli also pointed out a point that SLT has a learning curve. You cannot focus the beam on pigmented Schwalbe's line. You have to focus it on trabecular meshwork, to be very precise. So basic is like gonioscopy perfection is must. And initially when I started my practice in 2018, and that was the first machine SLT which I purchased right from the beginning of the practice. I don't know why, but I was very impressed with the study we did in Shankar Netralaya. So when started initially, I was a little reluctant that I should not have shots more than 40 shots or 50 shots, fearing the complications. But the machine which I have is Twin Star. So initially it did not respond. Same like a Zeiss machine differs in YAG laser capsulotomy. The power needed in Zeiss YAG cap machine, it's like 0.5 millijoule. In machines like YAG, in Appasamy, you need minimum of like the power setting, which is equal to 1.8 millijoules. So this difference is there. Similarly, in SLT, if we are talking, if 0.8 millijoule power is required in Lumenis or Selecta, what I observed is like I have to keep it to 1.4 in this twin star. So that made a difference. And with the like after maybe like 3-4 patients, I started observing that pressures are responding. Initially, first 2 patients were like not even 1 or 2 millimeter mercury was decreased, and they were already on medications. Recently, I am like doing it on means like a primary procedure and offering patients, and if they have financial issues, I keep that in consideration also. And if I don't have much experience in that, maybe in last 1 year I have done around 15 to 17 cases, and most of them responded to SLT very well.
So from the financial point of view of the patient, now to the financial point of view of the doctor, do you feel it's a financially viable machine to buy for say a medium-sized private practice?
See, if you are having a solo glaucoma practice, I think you should go for this. And nowadays it is available in combo like SLT with YAG. And if a YAG machine, practical point of view, if a YAG machine comes around 5 to 7 lakhs range, this combined machines will come roughly around 20 to 12 lakhs. So it is a viable option, but if return of investment, if you are thinking that point of view, glaucoma practice takes some time to recover money. Perimetry is it's a white elephant, but it's a basic requirement. So similarly, SLT, it's a wonderful machine. It works, but it's a learning curve, but not more than few cases.
Right.
I think perimetry is difficult to compare because perimetry adds a lot onto our surgical practice as well. So if you consider that, perimetry machine, according to me, is much more useful and viable for even a single solo glaucoma practitioner compared to an SLT machine where
I'm talking in terms of return of investment. That
yeah, I'm just trying to say
finance. Yeah.
Yes.
Because 16 lakh machine.
I have a question for Ashutosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ashutosh, I just wanted to are you only giving this option to a treatment naive patients or any patients who are already on maximum medication doesn't want to go ahead with surgery or age-related issues like that? Any difference in outcome did you notice in your practice? Anything that already on long-term medication patients, how they are behaving after
I
SLT?
tried only on few patients who were already on long-term maximum medications. It did not work. In maximum patients on MMT, tried SLT, did not work, and I didn't charge them because I just told them we will give a try. And recently we had a doctor whose son is ophthalmologist. He's practicing in Delhi. So we discussed about that, and because SLT machine is only available in my setup in Central India, so she was under treatment of one senior glaucoma specialist. So they both came. We tried, and it made no big difference. So we had to go for GFS. So, but new patients, we try to convince if patient is financially stable and little educated, they go for SLT, and we need to counsel their son or daughter who comes, family members who comes with them, because they are the ones who take the decision. And people who are naive patients, they usually don't understand the importance of this. Sometimes maximum which I tried was patients who are not tolerating this PG analogs. So severe exfoliation and all, I got with few brands. So I tried switching them. Few were comfortable. Who were not, I tried SLTing them. It worked. So sometimes it works wonders, and sometimes you have to give consideration.
Great. Dr. Prashant, I have a question. In your presentation, you told that with patients with advanced glaucomas, we consider doing phacotrabeculectomy instead of clear lens extraction or phacoemulsification. Is there anything else that you consider? Do you look into the gonioscopy, and is that a deciding factor in considering phacotrab versus lens extraction?
You're talking
Or
about
is it just the advanced glaucoma, the stage of the glaucoma?
and their patient also has significant cataract.
Yeah, of course, of course. That
If
being considered, comparison between phaco versus phaco trap, do you consider gonioscopy if there is a lot of synechiae formation, if the angles are zipped closed? Do you still go ahead with, and even if the patient is having mild to moderate glaucoma nerve damage, do you consider phaco or phaco trap?
if there's significant synechia and then moderate disease, then phacotrap is a better option. If disease is mild and synechia is not there or less synechia, then cataract extraction itself would suffice. But advanced case of disease and synechia, better to go for a combined procedure that will benefit the patient much than this.
Manish sir, if you can tell us about your practice.
Look, basically, you're right in those terms that when you're somewhere in between, you're somewhere in moderate glaucoma, that's the decision you need to take. Whether are you going for a trabeculectomy or you want to add up a trabeculectomy to your cataract surgery armamentarium or not. Definitely in advanced glaucomas, we do go ahead and do a combined surgery. In early glaucomas, and the patient is well under control. So that's not just an issue about early glaucoma, it's an issue where the patient is under good control with minimum medications. I'd say around 2 medications, not the maximum tolerated medications. And you feel that the visual fields are stable, you go ahead and do only a cataract surgery. But I usually do not go too much into the issue about whether how much of synechia is there into the angle. But whatever you see clinically may not be the actual part. So it's a different way. You have to see the optic disc and look at the intraocular pressures. And the IOP is controlled by how many drugs. So whatever you may see clinically may not be the actual picture. So you may feel that 3/4 of the angle are closed, but the intraocular pressures are well under 10. So at that point, and you don't find that there is glaucoma that is very severe, there's no need to go for a trabeculectomy, but you need to explain to the patient that, yes, this is the situation. You may need to have a further surgery in case things don't move forward from there.
Thank you. Dr. Surajit, in neovascular glaucoma patients, many of the patients that come to us, unfortunately, will have a very low visual prognosis, or they would come with painful blind eyes. So for pain management, do you offer a surgical option to the patient, or you directly go ahead with a cyclodestructive procedure, considering the fact that diode CPC will not be available everywhere? And many of us land up doing cyclo cryo instead of photocoagulation. So do you give an option to your patients about surgical management, even if the vision is poor, but the eye is very painful and the patient wants a treatment for a painful blind eye?
Yeah, no surgical management as such, since I have the option here for diode. So I'll definitely first give the option of diode CPC to bring down the pressure. If it is not working, I'll go for the second sitting after a month, maybe. By that time, patient will be under AGM and maximum possibility, whatever medication I can use. But after 2 sittings also, if it is not working at all and patient is very symptomatic, I'm not able to control it, I directly ask our oculoplastic consultant to do the enucleation, if it is possible. No other options I give for that way, because whatever surgeries I do, in that case, if the patient, luckily I have not encountered any patients like that. If the patient says they don't want to get the eye enucleated, definitely maybe in that condition, one trabeculectomy or something may be done, but I have never done it and never advised it, since other options are there, and luckily never faced any patients like that. That retrobulbar alcohol injection is an option mentioned here, but it has potential some complications also. Never tried it, but definitely my option is the diode CPC. If it is not working, repeat it once, and if it is not working at all, then and patient is symptomatic, we go for enucleation.
I'd only say at one point that we need to find out what is the visual potential. So potential is a very different thing from what the visual acuity patient, this sort of neovascular glaucoma patients come with. They may come with 50 pressures, 60 pressures, intense edema. So let the pressures be reduced to a certain level, especially if the patient is that is only seeing eye. Reassess what type of treatment is required after reduce the pressures, and try to find out whether there is any potential or not. So I have a couple of patients who actually come with a very high pressures, neovascular glaucomas, and at the time when you check it, it's PL/PR sort of vision. But they may actually get some sort of finger counting vision after you do all these sort of therapies, and you find out that you do a trabeculectomy or do something on that. But they have only one eye. I have around 2 or 3 patients who have actually recovered to a counting fingers vision in that eye. after an aggressive management. So the potential is very important. So need to find out what is actual vision and what is visual potential. Both are different things.
Yeah, well, I advise enucleation definitely only it is a PL negative, confirmed PL negative thing, then only. Whatever, if a little bit vision is also there, PL inaccurate also, then all the options, whatever I have, will definitely try. Okay, I have one question for Dr. Mayab also, for that bleb needling.
Yes.
That how many times do you prefer, do you think that needling can be repeated before going for another surgery, say doing retrap? If you have done elevated bleb once, or you have done twice, you have done the needling and it is not working, after sometimes the pressure is again elevating. So do you consider repeating the needling is the option, or you will go for the retrap?
So if it's early in the disease, maybe in the first few months after trabeculectomy, then probably repeating it, maybe if after the first trap, if after the first needling itself, I've got some drop, I feel the anatomy of the bleb allows some sort of drainage, then probably I may repeat it once or twice. I may repeat it on the slit lamp as well if I'm not keen to take the patient in the operation theater. But after 2 or 3 attempts also, if after 1 week of the needling, bleb is absolutely flat and pressures are again very high, where doing anything repeat doesn't make any sense. And at that point of time, I don't think we have any option of doing a repeat needling. We'll go ahead with the next, whether you want to do a retrap or an HEMA, depends on what the situation is at that point of time. But I would not really then keep doing needling for that patient. Then it doesn't really serve much purpose.
Yeah, sometimes I've seen the patients with encysted blebs mostly. Well, once we lyse that, I think sometimes the pressure is dropping, some bleb we are able to see the aqueous egressing after few days or few weeks, maybe again the same encystment is there. So again try to lyse some tissues there, and again have seen the same procedure. So the some bleb is there, after needling it is showing some effect, but it is not lasting long.
That
So
is like for glaucoma surgeon, I think.
yeah, so ultimately, usually for me, after second needling, I have never tried anything. Even if the IPS was dropping, it is maintaining maybe for 6 weeks, 2 months, 1 month, something. So after that, I didn't try the needling again. Even if the assisted bleb is there, I directly go for the retrap or AGV, whatever is possible that time.
Dr. Manish, I have one question for you, sir. Sir, in a mild glaucoma, you are seeing a patient who is showing some changes on the OCT. How confident, but the perimetry is absolutely stable or perimetry is absolutely normal. How confident are you that changes what you are seeing on the OCT, which you have, that you are getting the similar point again as far as reduction of the RNFL is concerned? And is that reduction going to change your plan as far as changing the treatment, stepping up the treatment, or starting treatment is concerned, considering perimetry is absolutely stable or no change, or no perimetry is absolutely normal?
So basically, we are starting with a point when there are no changes on the visual fields.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not just the imaging that is going to guide me into deciding whether the patient requires a treatment or not. It is the whole gamut of examination that needs to be get. So I have to look in the optic disc also. I have to find out whether there is something suspicious in the optic disc, or is just a perimetric, or just the OCT defect which might be there. So if I suspect that there is an inferior and thinning there, and I see something into the OCT picture that makes some sense to it, it might be a pre-perimetric glaucoma. So there's something called as the pre-test probability, or before you do any sort of test, what is the type of probability that the patient has glaucoma. So when you examine the optic disc, when you see the intraocular pressures, when you look at the family history, you have a pre-test probability of a disease. And once you do a test, that pre-test probability will increase. So you have a 20% probability that the patient has glaucoma at a certain level. You have just examined the optic disc and there's suspicious thinning. You may be saying it's a 20% chances there. And you do an OCT and you do something and you find that there is something which is coming out in the OCT, you may increase it to 40%. It's not 100% still at that point, because you're still not very sure whether you should rely on the OCT or not. I'd be at this point also, if I find that everything is normal, the pressures are okay, and there is nothing that needs to be aggressively treated, and I don't find that there is anything, I can follow it up. And I can follow it up with serial OCTs also to find out whether there is a change in the OCT. So the change is becoming more and more important when you're trying to do an OCT and though there are no visual fields available. Explain to the patient, you have some OCT defects. We'll repeat it at a certain period of time and keep repeating it. You find a trend change which sees that there's a possible change, and that change is very important to document it. And then at that point, you decide whether you need to have a treatment or not just one point of an OCT. It's a change in the OCT that is happening, and you can have a serial you have a lot of graphs and you can monitor the RNFL thicknesses and all, and can find out if there is a change and that does correlate to what you see clinically. Yes, you should decide on treatment. First visit and you find visual fields are normal, just a suspicious disc, just an OCT defect, I can possibly wait also.
It's progression, talking of progressive disease.
Yes.
Manisha, can I ask a question related to my topic only? Suppose a patient comes in the OPD with a patient of age 45 years or so, present with pressure of 45 with angle closure glaucoma, has a clear lens. We started with YAG PI, started medical management, still the IOP is not under control, but the disc is looking healthy. Disc is looking healthy. There are synechia, disc is looking healthy. So what would you do?
Look, basically, you've done a PI, you've looked at the angle closure component, your pressures are not under control. Even if the lens is clear, you should fairly, and you know that the pressures are not under good control with maximum medications, you should go for a trabeclectomy.
Okay.
I'd go for a trabeclectomy, unless and until if there is the only reason, and there's certain situations where you can go for a extraction there, especially with the lens vault, what you have discussed. When the lens vault is high, that's the only situation, because if you do a trabeclectomy at that point, then that will not land up in problem. Find the antechamber, the lens vault is fairly okay, and you find a deep chamber, I'd go for a trabeclectomy at that point. I would not essentially go for removal of the lens, but that is another option. But there is another situation where I'll remove the lens, and that's exactly when there is a large lens vault.
That's the only condition.
That's all.
I think it was an excellent discussion, and thank you all the participants for contributing to such a wonderful experience. And it was really great to see all of you again, and hope next year we'll see each other physically, not virtually.
In Mumbai, definitely. We welcome
Thank
you
you
all in
for
Mumbai.
wonderful design of the course. Thank you. That was a controversial topic.
Thank you.
That was nice.
Thank you so much.
I see.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you, Surojit.
Thank you,
Prashant.
everyone.
And thank you,
Thank
Manish.
you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.